Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever loved someone so deeply that their silence felt like a punch to the chest? Have you ever wondered why they walked away as if nothing happened, while you were left holding the pieces of your own heart? Tonight, I want to tell you a truth that will change the way you see what happened to you. Because the narcissist doesn't just hurt you, they hide something after they hurt you. And what they hide is the very thing that could set you free. Stay with me, because this is where clarity begins. The hidden wound refers to the deep, often lifelong insecurity that lives beneath a narcissist's surface confidence. What looks like certainty, charm, or emotional dominance is not strength at all, it is protection. Long before they hurt you, they learned that being vulnerable was unsafe. Somewhere in their past, their emotional needs were ignored, dismissed, or used against them, and instead of healing that pain, they built armor around it. That armor became their personality. This insecurity is not obvious because it is buried under grandiosity, control, and self-importance. But those traits exist precisely because the wound is so fragile. A narcissist does not believe they are enough as they are. They believe love must be earned through superiority, admiration, or power. When they feel questioned, criticized, or emotionally challenged, it activates that hidden wound, and their response is often to deflect, deny, or attack. Hurting others becomes a way to protect themselves from feeling small. After hurting you, this wound grows louder, not quieter. Instead of reflecting or feeling remorse, they suppress the discomfort by distancing themselves emotionally. Acknowledging your pain would mean acknowledging their own internal damage, and that is something they are not equipped to do. So they hide behind indifference, blame shifting, or sudden detachment. It is not because they do not feel anything, it is because what they feel is unbearable. This hidden wound explains why apologies are rare and accountability feels impossible. Genuine remorse would require them to face shame, and shame threatens the false self they have spent their life defending. Rather than heal the wound, they protect it by pretending it does not exist. In doing so, they avoid growth, intimacy, and emotional truth. Understanding this does not excuse their behavior, but it reveals that the harm they cause is rooted in unresolved pain they refuse to confront. And from that hidden wound grows the illusion of strength, because when someone does not feel secure inside, they learn to look powerful on the outside. What you experienced as confidence, certainty, or emotional authority was never real strength. It was a carefully constructed performance. The narcissist learns early that appearing unshakable earns safety, admiration, and control. So they polish the image, perfect the posture, sharpen the words. They convince the world, and sometimes even themselves, that they are untouchable. But true strength is quiet. It doesn't need to dominate, dismiss, or intimidate. Real strength can listen without collapsing, apologize without losing identity, and face discomfort without running. The narcissist cannot do this because the moment they stop performing, the wound underneath threatens to surface. That is why any challenge feels like an attack. Any disagreement feels like disrespect. Any emotional need feels like a burden. After hurting you, this illusion becomes even more important. They double down on appearing fine, unbothered, or even victorious, not because they are winning, but because the idea of being seen as flawed terrifies them. If they admitted weakness, they fear they would lose everything: admiration, control, worth. So instead, they harden. You may have noticed how quickly they shifted from intensity to coldness, from connection to detachment. That was not strength, it was emotional avoidance dressed up as power. Silence becomes a weapon. Distance becomes dominance. Moving on too fast becomes proof that they were never affected. But all of it is an act meant to outrun the truth. And here is the quiet realization that changes everything. Someone who must constantly prove their strength has none to rest in. Their confidence depends on external validation, on being admired, needed, or feared. Without that, they feel empty. You, however, were strong in ways they could not access. You felt deeply. You questioned yourself. You stayed present in pain instead of escaping it. That is real strength. The kind that doesn't need an audience. The kind that heals, grows, and endures long after the illusion fades. And when that illusion of strength begins to crack, silence steps in to replace it. Because silence for a narcissist is not peace, it is protection. After the harm is done, After the tension reaches a point they can no longer control, they often retreat into quiet. Not the reflective kind, not the kind that heals. This silence is strategic. It is the absence of accountability disguised as calm. You felt it when the conversation stopped, when your messages went unanswered, when emotional closure was suddenly unavailable. To you, it felt like abandonment layered on top of pain. To them, it felt like relief. Silence allows them to avoid your emotions, your questions, and most importantly, their own discomfort. If they don't have to speak, they don't have to feel. And if they don't have to feel, they don't have to face the damage they caused. This is where the illusion of strength becomes especially convincing. They appear composed, unbothered, even healed. Meanwhile, you are left doing the emotional labor alone, processing, grieving, trying to understand what happened. But their quiet is not maturity, it is emotional evasion. True peace comes from confronting conflict, not escaping it. It comes from acknowledging pain, not burying it. The narcissist's silence is heavy because it carries unresolved shame, fear, and guilt beneath the surface. That's why it feels so loud to you. Your nervous system senses the lack of truth, the unfinished emotional loop, the absence of repair, and yet this silence reveals something powerful. Someone who chooses silence over accountability is choosing comfort over growth. They are not healing in that quiet, they are freezing in it. They remain emotionally stagnant, repeating the same patterns because they never pause long enough to learn. You, on the other hand, are forced into reflection. Their silence pushes you inward, not awe. And though it hurts, it also awakens you. While they hide behind quiet to avoid change, you move through the noise of emotion toward clarity. And that difference, how you respond to pain, is where the paths truly separate. And in that silence, something becomes painfully clear. It was never about connection the way you believed it was, because if it were, silence would have been a bridge, not a wall. But for a narcissist, control always feels safer than closeness. Real connection requires vulnerability, mutual influence, and the willingness to be affected by another person. Control requires none of that. Control creates distance. Control keeps the upper hand. Control protects the fragile inner world they are terrified of exposing. That is why, when accountability is required, they reach for power instead of presence. Withholding communication, affection, or clarity becomes a way to regain dominance. It allows them to dictate the emotional temperature while you are left guessing, waiting, hoping. And the more you reach for understanding, the more powerful they feel pulling away. Not because they don't care, but because caring feels dangerous. True intimacy would mean meeting you where you are, hearing your pain without defense, and admitting their impact. But intimacy threatens the false self. It demands authenticity, and authenticity would expose the wound they have spent their life hiding. So they choose control, subtle, quiet, often invisible, over connection that would acquire emotional risk. You may have mistaken this for independence or emotional strength. You may have told yourself they just need space or don't express emotions the same way. But space was not the goal, control was. The distance wasn't about healing, it was about maintaining emotional leverage. And here's the truth that slowly rewrites your understanding. Love does not require dominance. Healthy connection doesn't punish vulnerability. It doesn't disappear when things get uncomfortable. It leans in, not out. You were reaching for connection because that is how love functions inside a whole person. They were reaching for control because love to them feels like loss of power. And in choosing control, they lost the very thing they feared most, real intimacy. You did not fail at loving them. You simply encountered someone who was more committed to self-protection than to mutual connection. And once you see that, the silence no longer feels like rejection. It feels like revelation. And once you see that, another truth begins to surface, one that quietly reshapes how you see yourself. Because when someone chooses control over connection, they also choose denial over truth. And in that denial, your pain was never validated. It may have been minimized, dismissed, or rewritten altogether. You were left wondering if you were too much, if you misunderstood, if the hurt was somehow your fault. That confusion did not come from weakness, it came from being unseen. Your pain was real. It mattered, even if it was never acknowledged. Emotional harm doesn't require bruises or raised voices to be valid. It lives in broken trust, inconsistent affection, shifting narratives, and the slow erosion of self-worth. When someone refuses to take responsibility, they don't just avoid accountability. They leave you carrying the weight of both the wound and the explanation for it. You may have searched for closure in conversations that went nowhere or apologies that never came. You may have replayed moments, trying to figure out what you could have done differently. But the absence of validation does not mean the absence of truth. It means you were dealing with someone who could not tolerate it. And this is where healing quietly begins. Not when they finally understand, but when you stop requiring their recognition to believe your own experience. When you trust what you felt. When you honor the part of you that knew something was wrong even when it couldn't yet name it. Your pain does not need permission to exist. It does not need to be agreed with to be legitimate. It is evidence of your emotional awareness, not a flaw in your character. They may never say, I hurt you. They may never admit the impact of their actions. But your healing does not depend on their honesty. It depends on yours. And when you allow yourself to fully accept that what you experienced was real, something powerful happens. The fog lifts, the self-blame softens, and for the first time, you stop asking them to tell you who you are and begin listening to yourself instead. And when you stop needing them to validate your pain, you begin to see what was missing all along. Empathy, not the occasional charm, not the performative concern when it suited them, but the consistent ability to sit with another person's emotional reality without deflection or defense. Empathy is what allows someone to say, I see how this affected you, even when it's uncomfortable. And that is precisely why a narcissist hides from it. Because empathy demands accountability. To truly empathize with you would mean allowing your pain to matter as much as their own. It would mean acknowledging that their words, their silence, their control caused harm. And that kind of recognition cracks the false self wide open. It invites guilt, shame, and responsibility, experiences they have learned to avoid at all costs. So instead of empathy, they offer explanations. Instead of listening, they argue. Instead of repair, they retreat. It's not that they don't understand on some level, it's that understanding feels dangerous. Empathy would require them to feel what they've spent a lifetime numbing. This absence is why conversations felt circular, why you left discussions feeling unheard, why your emotions were met with logic, dismissal, or defensiveness. You were asking for emotional presence. They were protecting emotional distance. And here is the quiet but liberating realization: your need for empathy was not excessive. It was human. Wanting to be understood is not a demand. It is the foundation of connection. The problem was never that you felt too much. The problem was that you were offering emotional depth to someone who could not meet you there. As you heal, you may notice how different it feels to be around people who can hold space without trying to control the narrative, people who don't rush to defend themselves, people who allow your emotions to exist without needing to erase them. That contrast will teach you more than any explanation ever could. Empathy isn't something you beg for, it's something you recognize. And once you do, you stop chasing those who hide from it and start choosing those who are capable of real emotional presence. And as you begin to recognize real empathy, another truth comes into focus: the cost of living without it. Because when someone hides from empathy, they must also hide from themselves. The narcissist survives by wearing a mask so consistently that it eventually feels like their face. Confidence, charm, certainty, superiority. These are not expressions of self, they are shields. And shields are heavy. Carrying a false self requires constant vigilance, constant performance, constant control over how others perceive them. That mask is why they seem exhausted beneath the bravado, why their relationships repeat the same cycle, why nothing ever feels stable or deeply satisfying. Authenticity would bring relief, but authenticity would also require honesty, and honesty would expose the wounds they refuse to heal. You felt the weight of that mask even when you couldn't name it. You sensed the distance, the emotional inconsistency, the moments where something felt off. You were trying to connect with a person who was never fully present because presence would mean letting the mask slip. And that terrified them. What they hide after hurting you is not confidence, it is fra. fragmentation, the gap between who they pretend to be and who they actually are. Maintaining that divide costs them peace, it costs them depth, it costs them the ability to experience love as something safe and grounding rather than something threatening. Meanwhile, you were being asked, subtly, repeatedly, to adapt to the mask, to accept half truths, to lower your emotional expectations, to make yourself smaller so their illusion could remain intact. That quiet erosion is part of the harm you felt. But here is where the power shifts. The moment you stop trying to reach the person behind the mask, the weight lifts from you. You realize it was never your responsibility to save them from themselves. You were not failing to love correctly. You were loving someone who could not afford to be real. And in choosing to remove your own emotional armor, to feel, to grieve, to heal, you step into something they avoid entirely: authenticity. And that, unlike the mask, brings freedom instead of exhaustion. And in that freedom, something sacred begins to reframe itself: how you see your own heart. Because for a long time, you may have believed that loving them so deeply was your mistake. That trusting, staying, forgiving, hoping somehow meant you were naive or weak. But the truth is far more profound. Your capacity to love was never the problem. It was the proof of your strength. You didn't love recklessly, you loved sincerely. You offered patience, empathy, and belief because those qualities live naturally inside you. You saw potential because your heart knows how to nurture growth. You stayed present because connection matters to you. Those traits did not come from insecurity, they came from emotional depth. The narcissist's mask may have made your openness feel like a liability. Their avoidance may have made your consistency feel one-sided. Their withdrawal may have made your desire for closeness feel desperate. But that was distortion, not reality. When genuine love meets emotional unavailability, love often gets mislabeled as weakness. But look closer. Weak people do not feel deeply, they avoid. Weak people do not reflect, they deflect. Weak people do not sit with pain, they run from it. You did none of those things. You stayed awake in the discomfort because you believed truth mattered more than ego. Your love didn't fail, it was simply offered to someone who could not receive it without losing their defenses. And instead of questioning their inability, you questioned your worth. That is what manipulation quietly teaches people to do. Healing invites you to reclaim the narrative, to see your tenderness not as something to harden, but something to protect wisely, to understand that your heart is not something to close, it is something to honor. You were not too much, you were just giving too much to someone who could only take, never hold. And as you begin to see your love for what it truly was, a strength, you stop apologizing for it. You begin choosing space where it is met, valued, and returned. And once you stop apologizing for your heart, you begin to understand where real power lives. It does not live in control, avoidance, or illusion. It lives in the willingness to heal. Healing is not passive. It is not forgetting. It is not pretending the pain didn't shape you. Healing is the courage to look inward and ask, what did this teach me about myself? While the narcissist protects their wounds by hiding from them, you transform yours by facing them. Every moment you reflect. Instead of deflect, you reclaim energy that was once spent trying to be understood. Every boundary you build becomes a quiet declaration of self-respect. Every truth you accept, without minimizing or romanticizing the past, returns you to yourself. Growth belongs to the one who is willing to feel. You felt the loss. You felt the confusion. You felt the grief of realizing the person you loved was not who you believed them to be. And instead of hardening into bitterness, you softened into awareness. That choice alone separates you from the cycle they repeat endlessly. The narcissist remains stuck because growth threatens their false self. Change would mean admitting they were wrong, vulnerable, human. Healing would require humility, and humility is something they have learned to associate with danger. But you chose differently. You chose honesty over ego, awareness over denial, depth over defense. And in doing so, you gain something they cannot access: self-trust. You now recognize red flags sooner. You listen to your intuition. You understand that love without accountability is not love at all. Healing does not erase the past, but it reclaims your future. It turns pain into discernment. It transforms heartbreak into wisdom. While they remain emotionally unchanged, you evolve. And that evolution is not loud or dramatic. It is steady, grounded, and powerful. It shows up in the way you choose yourself without guilt, speak your truth without fear, and move forward without needing anyone's permission. That is growth, and it belongs to you. And when you begin to heal, something else happens, something quiet but revolutionary. You start to see clearly, not just the person who hurt you, but the entire pattern of your life. You begin to understand why certain relationships felt like walking through fog, why your heart kept being drawn to intensity rather than safety, why you kept making room for people who didn't make room for you. Clarity is the ultimate form of freedom, because once you see the truth, you can no longer live inside the lie. The narcissist thrives on confusion, on blurred lines, on emotional fog. They rely on your uncertainty to keep you engaged, hopeful, and compliant. When you finally recognize the patterns, when you understand the signs, the tactics, the emotional manipulation, they lose their power. This is why the 10th keynote matters so deeply. Freedom comes from seeing clearly. When you know what they hide, you stop chasing what they cannot give. You stop bargaining for love that is conditional, for attention that is transactional, for intimacy that is one-sided. You stop confusing intensity for commitment and control for care. Clarity does not erase the pain. It honors it. It places it on the table instead of hiding it under the rug. It allows you to grieve what you lost and still believe in why you deserve. And in that clarity, you reclaim your life. You stop replaying the past and start building a future where you are not small, not silenced, not manipulated. You start choosing people who meet you with honesty, who communicate without control, who love without needing to be praised. You realize the narcissist's greatest hidden secret was never their confidence or charm. Their greatest hidden secret was their inability to be real. And once you see that, you no longer need their validation to feel whole. You become the person you were meant to be, someone who loves deeply, lives boldly, and chooses truth over illusion. And that is the most powerful freedom of all. So, what does all of this leave us with? It leaves us with a truth that is both simple and transformative. The narcissist hides not because they are strong, but because they are afraid. They hide their insecurity, their emptiness, their inability to feel empathy, and their fear of being seen as anything less than perfect. And while their mask may have seemed powerful, it was never built to hold love, vulnerability, or real intimacy. It was built to survive. But you, yes, you, did not come here to survive. You came here to live, to feel, to love, to heal. And even though you were hurt, even though your heart was misunderstood, you are still here. That is not a sign of weakness. It is proof of your courage. You stayed when it was hard. You loved when it was risky. You believed when it was easier to give up. And that means you have a strength that cannot be taken away by someone else's inability to be real. Now, as you move forward, remember this. Your healing does not depend on their recognition. Your peace does not require their apology. Your worth is not defined by how someone else treated you. What defines you is what you choose to do next. Choose clarity, choose truth, choose yourself. And when the next chapter begins, don't just walk away from what hurt you, walk toward what heals you. Surround yourself with people who can hold your heart without trying to own it. Speak your truth without fear. Set boundaries without guilt. Love without forgetting your worth, because you are not here to be someone else's lesson. You are here to be your own life. And the moment you truly understand what the narcissist hides after hurting you, you stop chasing them and start choosing yourself. Stay with that. Let it sink in. Let it change you, and let your next step be the first step toward freedom.